Hello, this is Pepri. In this video, we are going to talk about one of the core features inside GSA, Microsoft Traffic, and especially its key capability, tenant restriction. I've actually covered GSA before in previous videos and blog posts, but back then, my main focus was deployment and testing, so I end up enabling a lot of different settings and features. So this time, I wanted to revisit the topic in a cleaner and more organized way. Also, recently both private access and private access have received quite a few new features. So, I'm planning to continue this as a series moving forward. Now, before we get into the actual setup, let's first talk about why Microsoft Traffic and tenant restriction became necessary in the first place. When companies adopt Microsoft 365, they naturally need access to Microsoft services and URLs. In the old on-premises days, opening a few required URLs was usually enough. But today, services like Office.com, Microsoft.com, and SharePoint.com are shared across many different tenants. And because of that, it became difficult to control which account users were signing into on the same device. For example, blocking personal Microsoft account or external tenant account wasn't easy. If a company had a traditional proxy environment, some control was possible. But in reality, especially after COVID and the rise of remote work and mobile office environment, forcing every connection through VPN or centralized proxy infrastructure became very difficult to manage. Technically possible? Yes. But operationally, it wasn't easy. And because of that, many companies struggle to control access to personal accounts and external tenants. That's really the background behind Microsoft Traffic inside GSA. Even inside Microsoft services themselves, companies now need to distinguish which tenant users are connecting to. Personally, I think this can also be viewed as part of internet access. But since this specifically focuses on Microsoft services and tenant level control, Microsoft provides it through Microsoft 365 and Entra related licensing. Now, the next section is really the core part of Microsoft Traffic. Actually, the slides you are seeing here were also generated with AI assistance. The previous slides were the same as well, and honestly, AI tools are getting pretty good at visualizing technical ideas these days. Since it helps express what I'm trying to explain much more clearly, I've been using AI-generated visuals more often recently. Now, inside Microsoft Traffic, there are actually several different features, but in this video, we're focusing specifically on tenant restriction. There are also features like session visibility and source IP restoration. You'll probably notice those terms in the diagrams here and there. But I think those topics make more sense later when we start talking about logs and visibility. The important point here is this: as long as GSA is installed, tenant restriction policies can be enforced regardless of the user, device, or location. In other words, companies can control who is connecting from where and to which tenant. You can think of it as a tenant level control for your corporate environment and managed devices. And this becomes especially important from a data protection perspective, especially when companies start implementing DLP related controls. Now, technically, some of these controls are possible with third party solutions as well. But from a security operations perspective, blocking services one by one is not always the cleanest or most efficient approach. With GSA, you can simply enable tenant restriction and centrally control tenant level access much more easily. Now, let's move on to the actual configuration process. First, open the Microsoft Entra Admin Center. If you look at the menu on the left side, you will find the Global Secure Access menu. Once you enter the dashboard for the first time, you will need to activate the service first. So go ahead and click Activate. Then you will see the onboarding process start in the background. After a few minutes, the activation will complete successfully. You should eventually see a message saying tenant activation has completed successfully. In my case, it took around 5 minutes, so it doesn't usually take very long time. Now, let's move on to deploying the actual GSA policy. Before configuring Microsoft traffic, I first created a security group called GSA, and I added users like Intune User 1 and Intune User 2 into that group. Now back in the Entra Admin Center, go to GSA and open Traffic Forwarding. On the Traffic Forwarding profile, if you have the required licenses, you will also see options for private access and internet access. But for this video, I only want to enable tenant restriction using the Microsoft Traffic profile. So first enable the Microsoft Traffic profile. Then at the bottom, you can either assign it to all users or only assign it to a specific group for testing purpose. In this case, I'll assign it to the GSA group. Once that's done, you'll be able to confirm the assigned group and policies. Now we need to enable tenant restriction itself. Go to the top section of Entra ID, then open external identities, and then go into cross-tenant access settings. Inside the default settings section, you will find the tenant restriction configuration near the bottom. Click Edit Tenant Restriction Default, then configure it to block access. Now, in my case, I had already created a policy ID beforehand, but if this is your first time configuring, you will probably see a Create Policy option instead. Go ahead and create a policy first, then click Save. Once the save is complete, go down to Settings, Session Management. There enable Tenant Restriction for Entra ID traffic. Basically, what this setting does is, it tells GSA to apply the tenant restriction policies we configured earlier. If you look at the Microsoft documentation, tenant restriction v2 has actually been around for quite a while now. And I did create a separate video about it before, but back then I enabled internet access and private access together as well. Looking back, those components were not really necessary for this specific scenario. So this time, I removed the unnecessary parts and re-recorded the setup process in a much cleaner way. Now if you look at the cross-tenant access settings documentation, you will see the same default settings configuration explained there as well. If you see the Create Policy menu, just create the policy first. Then configure the block settings for users and groups. The same concept also applies to application. Next, let's install the client. You can download the client depending on your operating system. In my case, I already downloaded the Windows version on my test VM. Now, let's run the installer we downloaded earlier. Of course, in a real enterprise environment, manually installing the client one by one is not realistic. So, rather, I'll cover Intune deployment separately in another video. Once the installation finishes, click Close. Then, if you check the bottom right system tray, you will see the GSA agent running. You should also see that Microsoft 365 and Entra are connected successfully. Now, let's test the policy. My current tenant is peppery.kr, and I'll try signing into another test tenant called Litware. As you can see, the connection is blocked. Now, let's say your organization actually needs access to a specific external tenant. For example, a partner company or a business collaboration scenario. So let's allow a specific tenant as an exception. Back in the Entra Admin Center, go to External Identities, Organization Settings. Here you can add organizations that you want to establish a trust relationship with. Add the partner tenant domain, then customize the settings and configure the allow policy. Now, if you want to allow account specifically, you will need to enter the account being used on the partner tenant side, or in some cases, you could also enter guest account used from your tenant into the partner tenant. Now, technically, Microsoft documentation explains that you should use the user's object ID here, but realistic speaking, looking up every user's object ID one by one is probably not practical. So personally, I think most organizations will probably end up using broader allow configuration instead. Once you save the configuration, let's test the connection again from the GSA enabled environment. This time, after entering the password and completing MFA, you can see the trusted tenant is now allowed successfully. And that's it for today's video. If this video was helpful, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Thank you.